Well, good evening, folks. Aaron Dorr here with Iowa gun owners with a really cool update for gun owners on the fight to pass the Second Amendment Preservation Act here in Des Moines. Joined with Representative Jeff Shipley from HD 82, the Fairfield, Iowa corner down there. And Jeff has been leading the fight in the House to help us pass the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And Jeff, yesterday was a really, really big day because after a couple of weeks of you working your caucus and IGO members emailing the Capitol, you filed this final version of this with a fantastic group of co-sponsors on this bill.
Yeah, great to be with you tonight, Aaron, and your audience. And thank you so much for helping bring this idea forward. The Second Amendment Preservation Act is a wonderful bill. I've been saying I think this brings the best of Back the Blue and Let's Go Brandon. It is really exactly what we need for this moment in time. It is very frightening sometimes being a state legislator and watching the federal government crumble before our eyes with all this deception, deceit, debt, inflation, et cetera. And of course, our sacred liberty on the chopping block. So yeah, it's a great bill. I'm happy it got assigned a number, and we're hoping to get a really robust hearing in the committee and get a lot of eyes on this legislation because I think it answers a lot of critical questions, critical constitutional questions that will define the destiny of the state of Iowa and the United States of America.
We're going to kind of talk about the bill here for a few minutes and explain to those who might not be aware of what SAPA means, kind of what that means, and answer some of the common objections that we hear from the DOJ to NPR and anybody in between. So just in a nutshell, what we're doing here is you as a state legislator, a state rep, are saying that, this is Iowa. I have the job, I being you, to pass laws with my colleagues that are in the best interest of the citizens of Iowa. And here in Iowa, we want Iowa cops, that's troopers, deputies, sheriffs, all of them, to focus on Iowa law when it comes to firearms, ammunition, accessories. We don't want them to be a mere appendage of the federal government. We don't want them to be having to enforce unconstitutional gun control laws that are contradictory to Iowa's strong Second Amendment laws. And that's all we're doing with this. And it sounds simple, but the reality is when you take away the manpower that Joe Biden counts on to enforce his federal mandates, much of his agenda is going to fall flat on its face.
Yeah, and I'd say that's a great description, Aaron. I'd say the problem we're trying to solve with this legislation is that Joe Biden has proven himself to be a naked dictator. He's willing to go after conservatives and the American people with executive orders, with that kind of action, whether it's legal or not. And they want to enforce it. So the problem we're trying to solve is that if somehow the Joe Biden administration goes after gun owners and somehow criminalizes very common and necessary gun accessories, and then all of a sudden Iowans could find themselves being criminals or questionably criminals overnight, and then that could put Iowa law enforcement in an ambiguous situation. And so yeah, we need to protect the public from Joe Biden, and we want to make sure that the state of Iowa. And again, there's a long precedent of this. This is a 10th Amendment style bill, but there is a lot of constitutional case law going back a long time to back this up, that the federal government cannot commandeer state resources to enforce their actions. So if Joe Biden, and I guess the next question is if Joe Biden does want to, enforce an unlawful federal action and outlaw, say, 30-round magazines or something, is the federal government really going to try to come in and enforce that over the top of Iowa once we put our foot down and say we don't want to cooperate with you?
Well, exactly, and there is an element of urgency here because, as you said, maybe he does it on magazines or other things, but what is already happening is his two executive orders that deal with gun rights accessories. And as we discussed earlier today, the first one, and this was all published on the Federal Registry last week. The ATF is making these unconstitutional mandates. They're not laws, they're bypassing Congress. The first one is going to deal with 80% lower receivers of very common homemade firearms, very common items here in Iowa. The second one makes criminals out of people who have an AR-15 pistol brace. And the Congressional Research Office themselves said 10 to 40 million Americans already own these accessories. And by August of this year, unless you add that to the National Firearms Act via a tax stamp like a machine gun, you're going to be facing felony charges, not just in Washington, D.C. or the left coast or the blue coast. It's going to be right here in Iowa, and they're going to expect Iowa cops to enforce it. And the big precedent here, as we discussed, Jeff, is in the Supreme Court. you mentioned this a minute ago, hundreds of years of precedent in the Supreme Court where the feds have always been told by the Supreme Court that in cases where federal law and state law are contradictory, the states do not have to be forced to enforce it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the U.S. Constitution on our side. Thank you for getting me back on track. I do have a hard time keeping track of all specifics going on.
Well, it's a big bill. It's a lot going on here.
Well, and just that the Joe Biden administration is being so aggressive. And while, I've been spending a lot of time trying to protect Iowans from mandates in other areas, you have the Biden administration with another executive agency doing everything they can to sneakily, they want to catch us looking, right? They want to make our liberty vanish overnight with the stroke of a pen. That has been the Democrat playbook. And I just want to give a real shout out to all the legislators who signed on. So, you mentioned 18 co-sponsors on this bill. That's pretty good. We're getting close to a third of the caucus where, we're one of those Republican stools that the party can't stand without. So I think that really is the threshold you want to meet to make some significant action. But Representative Stephen Bradley, I'll start with the guys who signed on last year. So that would have been Representative Henry Stone, Representative Tom Jennery, Representative Bobby Kaufman. And then, Representative Sandy Salmon's on board, Representative Brooke Bowden, Representative Bubba Sorensen. I was really happy to get him on board. So there's a lot of really great people to name, and I'll remember them as they go. But,
Westrich, I had the list. Success. I have the list here on my computer. It's a little bit easier for me than it is for you, perhaps, Jeff. But, you got Bradley and Bowden and Cisneros and Kaufman, Wheeler and Westrich, Jacobson, Stone, Thompson, Mitchell. Just a great, great list of lawmakers who understand that at the end of the day, it is your job to make laws for the state of Iowa. And if we're going to deny that, then we might as well sell the Capitol, make it an Airbnb, and just dissolve all of our state legislatures and all live under the tyrannical dictates of this madman president. The fact is, we have state sovereignty.
Yes, we have a responsibility to make the laws, but we also have a responsibility and a duty to answer these crucial constitutional questions and not let the federal government get away with this. The state government, by the nature of our constitutional republic, is a very important check and balance against this federal activity. And we have so much conversation about Article 5 conventions and term limits and all these kind of people want these silver bullet solutions. But until the state of Iowa is doing everything we can to put the federal government in its place and check and balance it under the constitutional framework we have, that's why this legislation is so important. And
absolutely. We're seeing NPR and other leftist media outlets. Well, actually, that's kind of all media outlets right now here in Iowa, attacking this bill. And, one of the things that they get very, very upset about is that we've built in teeth into SAPA. And I think what a lot of Iowans and a lot of Americans across the country have realized over the last couple of years, the last 18 months in particular, is that there are little, wannabe dictators at every level of government. We saw that with all the lockdowns and the mandates all across the country for the last year and a half. And so what we have done with SAPA is acknowledge the fact that if we don't have teeth in this legislation, there's going to be blue cities here in Iowa that are going to disregard this law and flagrantly violate it and tell their officers as early as June of this year on the 80% lowers and August on pistol braces that we're going to enforce these federal executive orders. And so realizing that we've got a problem where some departments, the Quad Cities, Iowa City, right here, Des Moines, whatever, that might violate this. What you've done with this legislation and what we worked on so hard was to put civil penalties in the bill. And so as it is written right now, if you're a gun owner in Des Moines and the Des Moines PD later on this year says we're going to enforce these federal executive orders, and Iowa has enacted this legislation, House File 2303, the gun owner who has his door kicked in, is arrested for having these accessories, can take that department, not the officers individually, but take that department into civil court and sue them for civil damages. And the genius, I think, Jeff, behind this is that it's taken the enforcement out of the hands of another layer of government, whether it's Tom Miller in this case, or even the governor or anybody else, and it's put that power back into the hands of we the people. And now individuals can hold their government accountable. And of course, this is a direct copy of the law that passed to our neighbors in the South in Missouri last year. This is the part right here that the anti-gunners really despise, but we know it's very important.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I'm so thankful for the bill authors who were able to craft these teeth and allowed it to get it to a point where I could pick it up and run with it and just recognize a great idea. The teeth are so critically important because law enforcement is just as important as lawmaking. And I think a lot of time the legislature doesn't realize that. And just a couple of examples. We've passed other bills on critical race theory in school, for example, but because we didn't have very clearly defined teeth and an enforcement mechanism, we still have public educators and teachers unions, flagrantly disrespecting the laws of Iowa and getting away with it. And that happened the same thing on the vaccine passport bill that we did. So, even though we've made a lot of big conservative strides in certain areas, the teeth are what really matters in the enforcement of the law. And ultimately, as you know, Aaron, this is the controversial aspect of this because it's very easy to get any sort of establishment style Republican to go along with it philosophically or in concept. Like, oh yeah, this sounds like a great idea, but it really is supporting the teeth as, okay, we are really serious about this and we mean business when it comes to protecting our liberty. And Iowa's perfect, not only because we have Missouri just to the south of us, but it's in our state motto. So this really should be an open and shut case. And again, that's why I'm so thankful that so many of my Republican colleagues was able to help out with this legislative project. And again, now we do have, and you're obviously not naive to this. It's a big,
it's a big
call.
lift.
We got to get through committee. And then obviously I think what happens in the state of Missouri before their Supreme Court will influence this a lot, because that seems to be a lot of the hesitation, or people are afraid to be trailblazers because they don't want to put up with these challenges. Thankfully, the state of Missouri is really carving out a really great place for the state of Iowa to come in behind and really support them.
Well, and of course, as our members all know, I have the high privilege of working in a bunch of different states, and I led that fight, as you know, Jeff, in Missouri last session for the Missouri Firearms Coalition, our sister organization. And I was actually in Jeff City, Missouri yesterday, or 2 days ago, I guess it was now, where the DOJ was trying to ask the Missouri Supreme Court to strike that law down. And there's a couple interesting takeaways from that. Number one, they did not just phone in an amicus brief. The DOJ came out to, flyover country, right? Iowa, Missouri, we're all just a bunch of, hillbillies to these people. They came out in person at the Capitol, the Supreme Court chambers, because Joe Biden knows, or his handlers know, Joe Biden doesn't know much, but Joe Biden's handlers know that if SAPA stands in Missouri, or if SAPA begins to spread, in this case, for example, in Iowa, if all of these red states begin to realize and assert the power that they have, the sovereignty that they have, then Joe Biden's handlers have a very big problem in Washington, D.C. And it's not just on guns. This issue of state sovereignty of the 10th Amendment applies to a whole wide range of issues that we all care about. What was really good in the Supreme Court yesterday or 2 days ago in Missouri was just that the justices asked the DOJ, I was in the room numerous times, they said, yeah, we get it. You don't like the law because you don't like what it does, but what is the constitutional problem with it? And the DOJ asked him, or the court asked the DOJ multiple times, and every time he just basically said, we don't like this law. Well, yeah, we know why, because our Merrick Garland and the president they're hyper tyrannically minded leftists right now, and they want us to enforce their laws. And Jeff, what always makes me laugh, we discussed this on the phone the other night, was that, when President Trump was in the White House and he was trying to have cities and states deport violent illegal aliens, sometimes they were convicted of violent crimes. But when they tried to deport violent people, illegal aliens out of our country, the left said, come to our cities, come to our states. We'll give you sanctuary. We'll give you aid. And the left never had a problem with that at that time. They never raised any constitutional arguments at that time. And so I think for our members, I know for you personally, if the left can assert state sovereignty when it suits them to defend violent, illegal aliens who are violent crime convicts in many cases, you guys sure have the authority to do the same thing for law-abiding gun owners here in Iowa.
Yes, we just have to love and respect our gun rights just as much as the left loves, illegal immigrants and supporting them. So it's really a who wants it more. I think a lot of people,
Yeah.
or at least, I mean, your probably viewers probably are familiar with these political science concepts, but there's, moments in history where big things start to shift. And we are
Yes.
at a very interesting moment in time where these forces of federalism and the future of the U.S. Constitution and, what it means to be an American and American values. We've been saying it for a long time that the Second Amendment really is the ultimate guarantor of freedom. And, this really is proving to be true when you look at some of the other nations around the world. So it's just so
Exactly.
important that as these opportunities present themselves, it's so important that we all unite together and make it very clear, this is what we expect. This is the Constitution. These are the laws we adhere to, and we're not going to stand up for Joe Biden's lawlessness. And just like the Canadian truckers, all we have to do is just say no. We just have to say, no, we're not doing it. You can't do it. And now, I guess the question is then what happens? So if Iowa law enforcement isn't collaborating, I mean, hypothetically, what if they start sending ATF agents or that sort of thing going on? I mean,
that's a very good question to that, Jeff. And I know what you're asking, but I will also clarify that we're seeing other entities in the state capitol, other organizations. We're seeing some media outlets asking that question, and they're trying to claim that your legislation, SAPA, House File 2303, violates the supremacy clause. That's the number one objection that we hear time and again. But what you just said is both the problem, but it's also the answer. The truth about SAPA is that this pertains to Iowa law enforcement. We do not have the ability as a state to stop the feds from sending in their manpower into our state to enforce their legislation or executive orders, or no matter how tyrannical it is. That's not what this bill addresses. But what it does address is that they cannot force us to use our manpower, our tax dollars, our resources to enforce their agenda. So anybody who raises the supremacy clause issue is ignorant of what we're talking about. We're not saying what the federal government can or cannot do. What we're saying is that they cannot tell us what to do here in Iowa.
Well, thank you for that clarification. I hope this is really a great discussion that everyone could take part in. Because, this is a great just civics curriculum in this issue alone. You can learn so much about the American constitutional republic, our history, why this is so important. So,
I think you nailed it, Jeff. You said what you said a minute ago really kind of caught me, was that, sometimes you were a part of big movements in history, and, IGO has been around for almost 15 years, been leading these fights on constitutional carry, stand your ground law, all these things. But in many ways, what we're working on right now, the impact of SAPA, awakening red states, red America, to their authority as a sovereign state, drawing that line in the sand and defending our state residents against federal overreach, federal tyranny. It's the issue of our time right now. And I think you're 100% correct that this is the fight that needs to be fought next. And when we assert this authority, it has benefit, it has issues, it has protections for things far more than just our gun rights. So just want to thank you a lot, Jeff, for leading this in the House. We have a similar bill right now in the Senate, as you're well aware. There are a lot of amendments being talked about behind the scenes right now. So for all the members who are watching right now, the action item today is to contact the committee. This is in the House Public Safety Committee. We have a link below the video right here. Just ask them, we want you to pass HF 2303 as is, no amendments, leave the teeth in place, and send a message that Iowa still stands for freedom.
Absolutely. And so thank you so much for everyone who makes it possible. I'm an honor to be a part of this. I'm so glad we got a good chunk of our colleagues on board. I also want to give a shout out to Senator Zach Nunn. As funny as it is, we work in the same building. I haven't actually seen him since he had the subcommittee hearing a few weeks ago. I haven't had a chance to thank him and congratulate him on at least getting that done. So it is a big team effort. And we got to work together and get this done. There's really no other way. The only other option is submitting to federal tyranny. And for me, I'm a give me liberty or give me death guy. So that's not an option to me. We have to get this bill done. The sooner the better.
All right, guys, take action. Hit that link below. Talk to the Public Safety Committee. It's an automated process. Share our video. Make sure everyone knows that in the House, Jeff Shipley is leading this fight for SAPA legislation. Jeff, thank you again. We'll have more video updates with you and for our members in the coming days and weeks. But for tonight, thank you again for leading this fight, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Yep. God bless you. Let's get it done.